Hello, I'm Charlie Jackson.
And Dylan Sutko with a very special story today, brought to you by STA News.
Today we will be interviewing a man from Liberia.
This is Mr. Chris Simpson, a native Liberian who moved to the United States.
But first, we must tell you some basic information about Liberia. Liberia is located on the coast of Western Africa and was formerly known as the Pepper Coast. It was originally known as the Pepper Coast because when Europeans first visited the area, they noticed a lot of pepper grains growing there.
The Liberian flag resembles the American flag because the American Colonization Society freed black slaves and moved them to Africa in 1920. James Monroe and Abraham Lincoln supported this, and in fact, the capital of Liberia is Monrovia, named after James Monroe.
The ACS and its supporters believe that freed American slaves would have greater freedom and equality in Africa. Freed slaves began moving to Liberia in the 1820s. In 1847, a country of Liberia was formed.
The freed slaves became known as the Americo-Liberians. When they first arrived in Liberia, there were already tribal groups there. And when these tribal people did not want the Americo-Liberians there, and sometimes violence broke out between the two groups. In fact, the Americo-Liberians discriminated the tribal groups and did not let them become citizens, even though the Americo-Liberians were discriminated in America.
In the 1940s, Liberia was doing great under President William Tubman. Tubman modernized Liberia, raising money for foreign countries like the U.S. to build an airport. The economy was starting to grow. Liberia started getting involved in international affairs. Liberia was a founding member of the United Nations.
In 1980, while William Tolbert Jr. was president, a militant group came in and overthrew his leadership.
Master Sergeant Samuel Doe killed President Tolbert and his cabinet members. Doe's militant group organized a fake election to elect Doe for president. This election was not fair or free. In the 1980s were a time of terrible government repression and economic depression.
In 1989, Charles Taylor started a revolution against Doe's government. Then the Liberian Civil War started. Doe was captured and executed, and the revolutionaries started fighting each other for power. Sadly, from 1989 to 1996, 200,000 Liberians died in the First Civil War.
While in power, Charles Taylor caused terrible problems like violence in Liberia and a nearby country, Sierra Leone. In 1999, many rebels groups started to overthrow Taylor. This resulted in the Second Liberian Civil War. 50,000 more Liberians died between 1999 and 2003.
In 2003, the Liberians joined together and accused Taylor of crimes against humanity. They kicked him out and he lived in exile in Nigeria. The UN helped Liberia by giving them security and monitoring the elections so it would be fair.
Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was elected the new president. She is a Harvard graduate and is the first woman president of Africa. Today, Liberia is still recovering from 150 years of violence and war.
Now, on to our interview with Mr. Chris Simpson. I just said James Dylan Sutko.
I'm Charlie Jackson.
And I'm Christian Simpson.
And this is our interview with Mr. Chris Simpson.
Mr. Simpson, is your family related to freed slaves or indigenous tribes who originally inhabited the area of in Liberia?
My family is part of the freed American slaves that went over to Liberia.
Yeah.
And my great-great-great-grandfather went over there. His name was John Simpson.
Okay.
And he had originally been both a priest as well as a landowner and a politician in Florida. And it was he who first got on the boat and decided to go back to Africa.
Okay. Mr. Simpson, what is your job?
Right now I work as both a management consultant as well as an attorney. And I do that right here in the Washington, D.C. area.
Solid.
What was your childhood like growing up in Liberia?
Well, it was short because I moved here when I was just about 5 years old. But the things I do remember are kung fu movies on Sundays.
Yeah.
And also having a dog that I love very much. Liberia has the capital named Monrovia, and that's where my family was. We lived in a fairly big house in what you'd call a suburb, but it wasn't very far from the capital. I mean, it's probably the same distance from here to the capital of D.C. as it was from where we lived to the seat of the capital in Monrovia.
Okay. When and why did your family move to the U.S.?
When was in 1977. And the why is my family had been very involved in government in Liberia. My dad was the Secretary General of the True Whig Party, which was the big political party in Liberia. And my grandfather had been vice president of the country. And so when things started to go kind of bad in the country, they looked to people like my dad and our family as the cause of it. And so it was much safer for us to come here to the U.S.
Okay.
Bless you.
Thank you. What do you think of the new Liberian president? Is she popular? When is she up for re-election?
I think she's great. I have a bias probably because our families are very close.
Yeah.
And my dad serves as an informal advisor to her. He grew up with her. Is she popular? I think so. I was there for the most recent election in 2012, which is not very long ago. And things in Liberia, I think have gotten a lot better with her there. There's a lot more stability. Re-election, I believe the term is 6 years right now. And actually I misspoke, it was 2011 that I was there. But I don't know if she's going to be able to run. I think their constitution now says that you can only be president for 2 terms, much like here in the U.S., but it's longer, obviously, it's 6 years. But who knows? In African countries, things tend to change really quickly. So we may see her up for election again at the end of it. But she's getting up there in years, so I don't know if that'd be possible.
Okay. What do you think about your country's history? Where was your family during the Liberian Civil War? What was it like?
Well, the country's history is very interesting because it's tied, obviously, really closely to the United States. From the country's founding, with freed slaves going over to populate the landmass it's now known as Liberia, to really being a leading country in all of Africa. A lot of folks aren't aware that Liberia is one of the 2 countries in Africa that was never colonized. although people might call it sort of a U.S. colony. Liberia also was really played a real pivotal role in in World War II for the United States, serving as a base from which the United States could send soldiers and supplies and all that kind of stuff to help win the war. The more recent history is the stuff I think you're asking me about, which is the Civil War. And as I mentioned before, my dad brought us here to the U.S. in '77 because of that Civil War that began then. A good thing, most of his friends were killed during that time period. And since that time, Liberia has had a succession of rulers, and I call them rulers because they weren't really elected people. They just kind of had the most force at the time that didn't necessarily have the country's best interests at heart. They just saw themselves as being able to have power and money and that kind of stuff. So that was unfortunate because a lot of the gains that the country had made in becoming really one of the most technologically advanced countries in Africa were all taken away as the fighting was going on. There were child soldiers, kids your age and younger, with guns that you wouldn't believe. So, there's no doubt that, Liberia has had a long way to come when you think about that kind of thing happening in the country.
What are your parents' names? Are they currently living in Liberia? What is life like in Liberia for them now?
Yeah, my dad, his name is Clarence Simpson Jr., and he is in Liberia. My mother is here. Her name is Judith Simpson, but she's right here in the D.C. area, so you probably know what life is like here in the D.C. area. For my dad, as I mentioned, Liberia has had a lot of things happen to it where, a lot of the gains that it had are no longer there. So one of the things that would shock people here is that the country doesn't have electricity all throughout the country. I mean, there's literally in typical household, you're not going to have electricity. People who have a little bit more money will have their own generators, and they'll run those generators from around 5:30 at night through the morning, and then cut the power off, which is really expensive and also not environmentally friendly, I would say, with all the oil and gas that's used for those generators. So life is very different than what you see here in the U.S.
Okay. We heard you recently moved to Liberia, but moved back to the U.S. Why did you leave Liberia? What was it like? Why did you move back?
Well, I moved back because of two things. One, because my dad was there and he's wanted me to move back for a really long time. And two, there's stability in the country now politically, and the country is really rich with natural resources and opportunities. Because of my family's history in the country, I would have had and still have a real advantage in terms of being able to take advantage of those opportunities. When I went back, there were certain projects that were in the offing that I hoped to really get going. One agricultural project, another construction one. They were taking just way too long to happen because of the election that I mentioned. Everybody kind of wanted to see if Ellen Sirleaf Johnson would get reelected, and they were sort of holding their fire until after the election. For me, it was tough, but I said, you know what, I'd like to go back to the States and kind of see whether or not it makes sense for me to still be interested in going back to live in Liberia. But for right now, I think I'm not going to be going back. But three of my sisters look like they will be.
What is music like in Liberia? What is your favorite Liberian song? What is the food like?
Boy, with music, I don't actually know that much Liberian music. But my favorite song that's played at pretty much every wedding and every big party is a song called "Sweet Mother," and the song is a tribute to moms, and it's a beautiful song that every time it comes on, I'll grab my mom and we'll head out to the dance floor.
Yeah.
But the other questions you asked are about food. You can actually get a lot of the foods that we eat in Liberia here in DC because there are so many different people from West Africa here in DC. Liberia is tropical, so it's really blessed with a lot of different stuff. But the staple food is rice, and so pretty much every meal has rice in it. To some degree or another, it'll have rice and it'll have some kind of greens and a ton of meat and fish. It's right next to the ocean,
Yes.
so and there are rivers that are running through all over the place. So there's a lot of fresh fish and crabs and crawfish and everything else that you can put in your food. Did I miss one? Well, I think I got them all. Yeah.
We heard that part of Liberia style of home resemble the American South in like the style of homes. Is that true?
Yeah, it is, and it's true because of what I just mentioned with the climate. It's there's two seasons in Liberia. There's rainy season and there's dry season. So like here, you guys have winter, spring, summer, and fall, but there, right now, for example, it's the dry season. And so now's the time that people are at the beach all the time. They're getting out there in the sun and on the beach. But in a few months, all of a sudden it'll be rainy season, and it rains hard. It rains every day, and it's hard to do much of anything. And so the houses are designed to take advantage of the warm weather. You're pretty much going to be in the 70s all the time. It never gets really, really hot, but you're talking about 70 to 85 all the time, and so you have a lot of things to take advantage of that good climate.
We know that you moved to Liberia when you moved to the U.S. from Liberia when you were 5. But what do you remember you would do during your free time as a child?
Well, we were really fortunate to have a really nice playground right in our yard, and so my friends from the neighborhood would pretty much come over to our house, and we had a swing set and slide and our dog, and we had a basketball court. So a lot of the things that you probably grew up doing over here, I was doing in Liberia with my friends from the neighborhood. Yeah.
Do you think it is right that 85% of Liberia is in poverty? Is the current government providing any help to these people?
Well, I don't think it's right, but I think it's not surprising. There's been, I think, 20 some odd years of conflict, quote unquote, and most people are just tired of it. The government, I think, has done a good job of getting things stable again, which is great. And I think that there are things in place to get the market going again, so that people can feel comfortable enough to put money there and get people working and having jobs. But with 20 years of conflict, with kids like yourself, unfortunately, thrown into it, there's a real gap with respect to people's skills. For jobs in a modern economy, they just they don't have that opportunity to acquire those skills and be able to compete globally. So Liberia's got a long way to go to get back to to being able to be looked upon as a place where companies can go and have workers there that know how to do the jobs that they have.
beaches like in Liberia? We heard that surfing is good there. Can you tell us anything about that?
Oh yeah, there are a lot of beaches, and because it is on the coast, and they are beautiful. I think the best part of the beaches in Liberia is that with all that coastline, there aren't that many people at the beaches. So I'm sure here, if you go to the beach and it's really nice, you're going to see a ton of people, and you're going to kind of have to fight for space. But in Liberia, you don't have those worries. There aren't as many people who are going to the beach. I'm not a surfer, but I'm told by surfers in Liberia that it's great for that. But it's also pretty dangerous. It's the Atlantic Ocean, just on the other side, not the U.S. side, but the other side, and it can get pretty dangerous. Yeah.
Okay. We know you played basketball at St. Stephen's and St. Agnes. Is basketball a popular sport in Liberia?
It is popular. It's not the most popular. The most popular sport is soccer, or as they call it there, football. And had I grown up in Liberia and spent more time there, I probably would have been more into that than basketball. That was my dad's sport. He played that here. He went to school here in the U.S. And he was a big soccer star when he came over here. But yeah, basketball is my sport, and had things gone a little better, maybe I could have played in the Olympics or something for Liberia. But there was too much going on at that time.
What are the major industries in Liberia?
Liberia has a ton of natural resources. I think I mentioned that before. The one that most people know about and that is still huge is rubber. The Firestone Company went to Liberia right around World War II, as I mentioned before, and they really built up the country's infrastructure. They planted a ton of rubber trees, and they also did something to encourage the production of rubber, which was they had Liberians start their own farms, learn the farming techniques from the Firestone plantations, and then once the trees matured and grew, they would be able to take and sell their rubber product to Firestone. So that remains, even to this day, through all the civil conflict and everything else, it remains a mainstay of the economy. But Liberia also has huge forests, and so there's a very big timber industry. It also has diamonds and iron ore, so those minerals are also a very big industry. And most recently there was oil that was found off the coast, so we don't know whether or not it's going to be exploitable at a commercial level, but the expectation is that it will be. So in all likelihood, Liberia is going to also be an oil producer here in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about Liberia?
Well, I think I've covered most of it. It's a country that has a really proud heritage that unfortunately got mired into civil conflict. And maybe for your social studies classes, as you guys continue here at St. Albans, you'll talk about what happens when there's a small contingent of people that have a lot of money, and there are a whole lot of people that don't have a lot, and there's really no middle class in a country, and that's a recipe for disaster. Is a perfect word, Dylan. Perfect word. That's what Liberia fell into, and it's what a lot of third world countries fall into. There were folks like my family who had it pretty good, and a whole lot more who didn't have it very good, and no one in the middle, and that really stoked tensions in the country and led to the civil conflict. So something to be aware of, and hopefully as the country tries to get back on its feet, it can provide opportunities for people all throughout the social economic ladder.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you for your
guys.
time.
Thank
so
you.
much.
I'm glad you guys are interested in Liberia.
That concludes our interview with Mr. Chris Simpson.
I hope you liked it.
This is Dylan Sutko
And Shirley Jackson
signing off for SCA News.